Welcome, everybody, to our first meeting of the Global Health Medical and Healthcare Special Interest Group of eAA. We're very excited. I'm Manny Straley, Dr. Manny Straley. I've been in the assessment world since I've been an undergraduate, working on personality assessments, was a therapist, had a social therapy certificate. I made my way into the professional licensing and certification space with my own consulting organization over the last 10 years, where we do put exams together, maintain them, work on accreditation, work on talent and competency models, and so forth. I'm joined by my esteemed guests here, Romana, Jessica, and Terry, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So why don't we begin with Romana, and then we'll go to Jessica and Terry.
Thank you, Manny, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the world, or good evening, maybe. My name is Romana Moss. I'm Director of Education at the Royal College of Emergency Medicine, and I'm also a Director of the E-Assessment Association. I'm very thrilled that this is our first webinar of the Medical Special Interest Group, which is something the eAA has hoped to do for a few years now. So I'm extremely excited and happy to be here at our first webinar. Thank you, Manny, and hello, everyone.
Good morning. I'm Jessica Dangles. I'm the Executive Director of the Certification Board of Infection Control and Epidemiology, so very much global medical and healthcare related. I'm happy to be here this morning, joining you from Chicago, Illinois in the United States. I've worked with both Manny and Terry on some of my own assessments and really looking forward to being part of this very inclusive group. And Terry, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning and afternoon, possibly evening to everyone. My name is Terry Hinckley. I'm the CEO of the National Association of School Nurses. Like Manny, I've worked in the assessment certification industry.
Might have lost Terry, but
we seem like we lost Terry here. Not sure why or how, but she's one of the co-chairs, and Jessica's the other co-chair, and I'm the chair. I forgot to mention that I was, early in my career, I was a junior psychometrician at the National Board of Medical Examiners, where they do the U.S. licensure. So that's, I have a lot of background in medical assessments as well. Terry, I don't know what happened, so
I got kicked out, so I apologize right in the middle of my introduction. So I'll just say my name's Terry Hinckley. I'm the CEO of the National Association of School Nurses. I've been in certification and learning for approximately 15 years. My background is in nursing. I'm located in New Jersey, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. Thank you. Sorry for the technical issue.
That's okay. I think we've lost Manny as well. It looks like the internet gods are not playing very favorably with us today. Oh, Manny, you're back.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all for your introductions. I want to sort of begin today with what the purpose of the SIG is and some of the benefits, and then I want to have Romana introduce Dr. Chris McManus, who has an incredible background in assessment, one to die for. One of the things about this SIG is that what we're trying to do is it's a new group. It's within the medical and healthcare world. One of the things that we're trying to do is exchange ideas and expertise, provide resources to all of you, investigate some topics, whether they're hot topics or common topics in medical and healthcare assessments. Some of you have heard some of these things. I've led other divisions in this area in different associations in the assessment world. Some of these examples might be alternative item types, performance assessments, gamification, accreditation, even remote proctoring challenges or common challenges that we see just with regular multiple choice questions, some of the pitfalls, some of the ways to make revenue, some saving ideas for your organizations, and then of course, with the interest of creating very fair, valid, reliable examinations that really increase those patient outcomes that the medical community is always seeking. So that's what we're hoping to do. If we could get to the next slide. If you do join And I've had a lot of experience with being part of various different organizations and volunteering. This is all volunteer for all of us. But you have a great opportunity to network, get to know people. I think some of the best things is just going to Jessica or Terry or Ramon and say, hey, you know what, like I keep on doing this multiple choice questions these ways. Is there a quicker way to do it? Or is there a better way to do it? Or how do I get like better subject matter experts to write item questions? Or are you using gamification? Or what are you doing these days? And it's just those informal chats that really benefit, so much benefit. And then that helps your own professional development, and you could start contributing to other challenges that your colleagues may have. And that's just so meaningful. And then the other thing is that it helps build your visibility and recognition. I go to conferences in the US these days, and I don't know people saying hi to me, like a third of them. I really don't know. They know about me, they know about my work. So it's just been incredible over the last 30 years and being really involved over the last 20 years. And I'm sure my colleagues on this call here can really vouch for that as well in their own careers. So we hope that you help us join. We hope we help us join. Well, you join the eAA special interest group and help us develop some resources. And even if it's just raising questions, those are always important. And some of the most basic and common questions are the ones that I find really fascinating. Like, what is a really good multiple choice question? I mean, we're still debating that as well to this day, but others are all into this generative AI, which is an incredible tool, and trying to create really great applications on that. So I'll stop there. I could go on and on and on. So Ramona, if you could introduce Professor Chris McManus, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So hello again, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you today. We're honoured to be joined by Professor Chris McManus, who's an esteemed academic who's worked with Bridge, medicine, psychology, and education. So Chris's research spans cognitive psychology, medical training, and assessment, with a particular focus on how clinicians think, learn, and make decisions. And his work has been influential and has shaped policy and practice in medical education, both in the UK and internationally. So without further ado, please welcome Chris McManus.
Hi, thanks very much. I'll say hi. It's easier than good afternoon, good evening, or wherever you are. Okay, you'll see I've called it Random Thoughts and Reflections, and that probably makes a lot of sense. A little bit about me, most of it not very relevant. I think you've heard it. I suppose the key things are that I am medically qualified, but I've also did an undergraduate and a postdoctorate and a PhD in psychology, which has always interested me. I've been teaching actually in the University of London since 1979, done a lot of multivariate stats and psychometrics. I've researched on all sorts of diverse topics. And in theory, I've finally retired, but in practice, I'm still working on a bundle of stuff because there's a lot of interesting things happening. Perhaps the most important thing to say about me is that since 1995, I've worked with MRCP UK. This is the membership of the Royal College of Physicians exam in the UK. It's one of the largest exams in the UK. At the moment, it has about 30,000 candidates a year and runs about 15 exams. Most of those exams assess knowledge, but we also run a real clinical exam. And when I say real, I mean real. That's not an exam with simulated patients. There are some actors, but there's also a lot of real patients with real symptoms and signs who are really ill. So that gives an edge to the entire process. Needless to say, there's a rich research opportunities with so much data when you've got 30,000 candidates a year. I came in rather accidentally. I'm notionally called educational advisor, and it's worth saying, as far as I can tell, I have no contract and never have. My role is a slightly strange one. I sometimes describe myself as being rather like the fool in Shakespeare's King Lear. I don't have power, status, money, or authority. And my job is actually to say the things others never quite want to say. And that, I think, is quite an important role. I often start my talks on assessment with this picture. This is the Royal Horticultural Hall. It's 19th century in Pimlico, next to Tate Britain in South London, just next to the Thames in North London. And this is the room where we have exams for our clinical students, written exams, knowledge-based exams. And in this hall, this is a photo, there's a gallery, this is a photograph of the hall. I've anonymized it, as you can see, so it looks like a drawing. But we have 300 final year medical students in there at a time. It's a 3-hour exam, 150 best of 5 or SBA questions. All the candidates have on their desk, which you can see here, is an iPad, which we provided, so it's relatively locked down. A few other things, a bit of paper and a pencil, calculator, ID card, and so on. And that's the setup. And they're there for 3 hours. They can go out for a break, of course. No, I'm hitting the wrong button. And I went to watch one of these a while ago, and it was a fascinating experience because half an hour before the exam started, they all came in, they were shouting, they were chatting, they were excited, fearful or whatever. They put all their bags in one corner of the room. They came and sat down, talked to the people next to them and so on. And about 5 minutes before the exam started, they all went quiet, and then the exam started. And it was utter silence in that room. And we watched from the gallery. And, oops, I'm still doing it wrong. No, I'm not. I'm doing the wrong one. We watched from the gallery, and it was like an exercise in Zen Buddhism. All these people sat still. They hardly moved. Every so often, an arm would reach out, touch the screen once or twice or 3 times, and come back. There was no movement apart from that at all. And you'd have wondered, if you didn't know what it was, you'd have wondered what it was. Now, we didn't have fortunately, up in the gallery, we had a computer provided by our exam provider. And on that were flying past numbers galore. And those numbers were things like how many questions have been answered by each candidate. And the person I was with, she was running it, and she said, let's look at the ones who've answered most questions. And she said, if you look in row 4 and column 7, you'll see somebody, they've answered almost all of the questions after 40 minutes. And then we went to the other end of this list, and there were people who barely answered. And she gave me a seat number and a location of this person, people who only answered a third of the questions by that time. And the fascinating thing was we could not distinguish them. We had no sense of how they were doing by looking at the outside. However, we were beginning to see some things about how many they were answering, whether they were getting some of them right or wrong, and so on. Now, I'm a psychologist, and of course, what I really wanted to know was what's going on inside their heads. And we were getting nothing out of the displays we were receiving, and so on. And really, I think this is the question as a psychologist I want to know, and an educationalist, what's going on inside the heads of all the people who are taking our assessments? We know the results we get at the end, but what's the process? How are they getting there? So that's the sort of thing I'm interested in. Now, a little bit more about the UK scene. I'm still doing the wrong key. I've been to 2 big meetings recently, well, medium-sized, small meetings. One is the big ASME annual scholarship meeting, which was in Edinburgh last week, and I spent the week in Edinburgh, and there was a lot of presentations there. The other one is a body you may not have heard of, EBMA, the European Board of Medical Assessors. They have that meet, they're always in Europe. That was in Faro in Portugal in April. Now, let's see a bit about what's going on at those meetings. The EBMA is much smaller. There's about 200 people at that meeting, and it's pretty technical. There's a lot of psychometrics. It's quite heavy in places. You can tell because the standard question you ask people is, are you doing this in R? And if they nod and say, oh, of course, then you know they're a different lot from the other ones who say, what's R? I use R all the time. It's what I do all my heavy lifting with. So they mostly know what they're doing, and they've got a lot of experience of online exams, computer-based testing, etc. A very different meeting to ASME, which is much larger. I should think there were about 1,000 people up in Edinburgh, and they're much more concerned with doing medical education. There's a lot of qualitative research there, which of varying quality. I was shocked when I heard 3 papers on the trot where they said n equals 8 for our qualitative study. And I always say if it's not in double figures, then it's probably not very good. Having said that, some of the qualitative research at its best was extremely good and extremely useful. So it's a very mixed bag of people there. In the whole meeting, there was actually only one proper psychometric session and very little about actually how do we process results, what are we trying to do with our results, and so on. E-assessment as such was not discussed much in either. Interestingly, there were only, representatives from 2 online providers, RISA, who seem to be in most places now, and the prescribing safety assessment, who are a separate organization. I didn't think there were any other providers present. And surprisingly limited discussion of how assessments are actually carried out. There was a lot of discussion on student exam anxiety, their strategies, their gaming, a lot on cheating, which of course it always comes back to that. And there was always nothing on how effective were these different methods of assessment at deciding who's going to be a good doctor, who's not. Because in the end, that's what it's all about. We don't just do this as a game. We do it because it matters. And chatting to Romana yesterday, we were saying one of the major differences between assessment in general and medical assessment is its very high stakes. It matters what people know and don't know in medicine, because they're going to go off and use that information and they'll treat patients, and that matters. There's also a lot of practical assessments, and we shouldn't ignore that either. The other thing, of course, there was a lot of, and you wouldn't be surprised by that, was discussion of AI. It had trebled since last year at both meetings. Lots and lots of discussion at both. And in fact, both keynote addresses at ASME were on AI. We've already heard mention of how we write questions, and a lot of people like to think we're going to be able to write questions more easily, etc., using AI. We might, but I'm more skeptical than some people are, less optimistic. Okay, so AI came up everywhere. There was a very good keynote address. It was actually the ASME Gold Medal lecture from Rachel Ellaway, who now works in Calgary, I think, in Canada. And she was looking back across a career where she'd been heavily involved, not just in assessment, but also in technology-enhanced medical education. Have we learned anything from the past 3 decades of technology-enhanced medical education? But you probably could substitute in there e-assessment or any other phrase you want. And she had a whole load of things. I'm just going to summarize some of them here. I mostly stolen them from her, but that's not to belittle what she did. On the contrary, it's superb. She said a number of things. 1, tech gets old fast. In other words, we may have wonderful tech now, but if you think it's going to be running in 5 or even 10 years' time, you'll be lucky. Do you remember some of those devices for education, those huge CD-ROM-like things which were the size of an LP, a long-playing record? And everybody was going to use these, all the teaching we from them. You barely even find one on eBay these days. She asked, where have all the educational technologies gone? That people had all sorts of ideas about interactive session, ways of learning and teaching. And often that would build in assessment at the same time. It would be a directed assessment. And she points out that actually IT in most educational institutions nowadays is mostly interested in none of those things. It's interested in security and admin, because if you don't lock the system down, it's going to get hacked and destroyed. And there's little interest in universities in general in educational assessment as such. The National Health Service, the NHS, in theory has vast amounts of data which you could use for understanding all sorts of things. Wouldn't I like to know, with the people taking our MRCP exams, what they're actually doing on the wards and in their clinical careers when they're seeing patients in the NHS. But as she said, they're obsessed with control and access. And that means one can't do anything. There's no way. They're so terrified you might do something, but they don't want to do. They prefer it if you do nothing. She and also at least two other speakers also raised something that Honora O'Neill is a philosopher. She gave in the UK the BBC Reith Lectures back in 2002, which were on trust and the nature of it. It's always a big theme. And she points out in her view of AI, it's one, accelerated the shift from trust to accountability. We no longer ask whether we can trust somebody. We ask, are they accountable? Trust has disappeared somewhere down the line here. And as she puts it, you have to prove to me that I can trust you. And actually, that's something that we don't always find with AI assisted activities. We find we can no longer trust the students to actually have written an essay and handed it in. Something else has done it, not somebody else. There's a lot of other stuff on AI, and I think we can't avoid it. A lot of people were playing with it. They were putting something into it and trying to see what the consequences were. Much of the discussion seemed to treat AI as if it were magic. And I find, certainly in MRCP and in many other organizations, administrators often seem to treat it that way. They actually have little idea of what it does, how it might do it, or even how they're going to use it. But they do tell us that AI will change everything. I'm a bit skeptical about that. And it always reminds me of that quote by Arthur C. Clarke, whose most famous book was the book that became the film 2001. And he said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And that's the way it's treated, as magic. Oh, put it in and something will happen that's useful. And I'm very skeptical about that. It does look like magic. If we went back 100 years or 150 years and told people we'd be having a session like this, through the internet and so on, it would sound like magic. There was some interesting technical stuff on AI. And most of that was actually on the idea of prompt engineering. I mean, engineering prompts, that is, it's a bit ambiguous, to try and steer and focus what LLMs are doing. And we heard about, for instance, one group who were writing clinical exam questions, and they reckon they had 2,000 lines of prompts into ChatGPT or whatever it was, in order to make it do what it wanted. You didn't just say, write me some exam questions, if only. And so that became more and more important. There was also an interesting 90-minute debate at ASME, is the essay dead? Now, I don't know, as an undergraduate, I was always writing essays on, what's the role of calcitonin or something. And then clinical essays we'd write about, what's the epidemiology of inguinal hernia or something, and that would be handed in and assessed. And it actually, essays is a broad sense here, explanation, but also exploration and reflection. There's a lot of critical and personal reflection in postgraduate work. What happened with that patient? Will you reflect on it and write it down? And the general feeling, as I heard it, was that for formative assessment, the essay might as well be dead, because so many people are cheating at it. There's no point in doing it unless those people actually are writing for personal growth and development. If they want to be able to write, then it's incredibly useful. So I think we mustn't pretend they're a practice for the real thing. They're there for personal growth. For summative assessment, there was also a realization that assessment validity is crucial, and we can't rely on that with a single assessment anymore. And that to get validity, we're going to have to use multiple forms of assessment. And interestingly, the thing that popped up is the form of assessment we've all pretty well abandoned, the Viva Voce examination. And we still do that in PhDs, of course. we don't just read the thesis, we bring them in for 2 hours and we talk to them, or rather they get them to talk to us about it. And actually, it's a very good way of us confirming the validity. If they can't talk about 50,000 words they've just submitted to us, then probably they didn't submit it or they didn't write it. So this is all part of validity. And I think the realization is that everything worthwhile that we do is effective only because it has predictive validity. And that means predictive validity onto other simultaneous assessments, or preferably across time. And that's something we've worked at quite a lot. I won't talk any more about it, but predictive validity is what it's all about. Okay, last 10 minutes or so, what did I talk about at EBMA and ASME? This gives me just a brief chance to talk a little about my own work, which probably most of you don't know about. We've only written any of it up as a single preprint so far, but there's a lot of data. And it goes back to what was happening in that exam hall. All these people are clicking on their iPads, and that's all being soaked up by the network somewhere and ending up on a server, and it eventually becomes their results. Now, the whole lot we can call the click stream. Every click, every touch on the keyboard, if they've got one, gets recorded with timestamps on it. But they're almost impossible to make sense of. If any of you have looked at the click stream coming out of a huge exam, there's millions of lines of data in CSV files, and you can't work out what's going on. So one of the things we've been doing is producing what we call click maps, where the idea is to take that massive information and make it into an interesting picture which we can interpret. And I often describe click maps to clinicians as being rather like x-rays. You can tell a hell of a lot from a chest x-ray very quickly, and clinicians still use them, and they're very powerful. And the other reason we're doing this is because there's always the spectre of cheating. We've never got rid of cheating in our exams. What we've got much better at is detecting it and working out what the mechanisms are and that sort of thing. Let me quickly show you a click map just so you get a sense of where I'm at on this. This is what we call a full click map. And we have early click maps as well. I'm not going to show you those unless somebody asks me a question. But what we've got here is, this is a map across time. Across the bottom, well, across the top is the clock time. It goes from somewhere after 8 o'clock to somewhere past 11 o'clock in the morning. That's what it says on the clock in the room. And across the bottom, we've got exam time. 0's when the exam starts, and 3 hours is when this is an MRCP exam, when this exam finishes. And the candidates are shown 100 questions in this exam, and they're given to them in random order. Every candidate gets a different random order, and that's actually shown down the side here. So this, I can't read it myself even on here, it's too small on my screen, but they'll see, I don't know, question 39 or something, and so on. And not all the other candidates are getting different ones. They look at that question and they answer it. And they either get the answer right or wrong. The click map knows the scoring. And according to what they answer, they either get a green code or they get one of the 5 red codes. And reds are varying versions of wrong. Of course, there's one of them will be correct on any particular question, but it won't always be A or B and so on. So they do that. They move on to the next one. Oops, sorry. Oh, and you're showing my hidden slides as well because of the way this is working. They move on and slowly they work up through. When they've answered a question as right or wrong, the line coming out the side turns green or red. And you can see this candidate got a couple of right answers here. They got a wrong answer. And they slowly work their way up through. And over 1 hour and 3/4 or so, this candidate has gone through all 100 questions. It's pretty linear. They're working solidly through. And then they've got 1 hour and a half, 1 hour and a quarter left. And at that point, they go back to the beginning and they go back to some of the questions. You can see they're going through in order still, and they're looking at the questions. And when they've done that, they go back a third time, and now they work much more systematically through all the questions once more. They look at a couple more questions here, and then they finish. And notice they're actually finishing 10, 12 minutes before the notional end of the exam. So they decided they've done all they can do. They can put in these pins, as we call them, or flags. The software allows them to do that. And these are items that they want to go back to later. And if you look over here, you'll see that many of the ones they've been through on the second pass are ones they've pinned as worth going to. Notice also that if you look at this question, they pinned it, they've got it wrong, it's a purple color, and then an hour or so later, almost an hour later, they go back to it and they get the right answer. They click on it and it turns green. So that took a long while for them to get the right answer. We can see the same thing going on with other questions, but there's a lot of interest here in what they're doing during this process. Okay. This one, since it's going to show you, this is an incredibly weak, bad candidate. And you can tell that just glancing at it because there's red lines everywhere. Hardly any green lines. And in fact, they got exactly 20% correct on a best of 5 exam. So they're right down plumb on chance. And they are the worst candidate out of over 1,100 who were taking that exam. So you can very quickly get a sense of it. Having said that, they went through, they took up certain items to go back to, they went back to them, they did occasionally changed an answer there, and so on. So it's not that they're just going through, they work diligently at it, they just don't know the information. And that's interesting. Okay, what are we doing with ClickMath? It's a very quick shopping list of stuff I've got to do in the next few months, really. We've decided to take a whole year of examinations at MRCP. That's about 20,000 candidates. Oh, and they're all doing paper 1 and paper 2. It's 40,000 papers they're taking. We want to know things like who leaves the exams early. You saw the first one left about 15, 20 minutes before the end. Some candidates leave very early indeed. And some of those, interestingly, are actually the very best candidates. They need nothing like the 3 hours we usually gave them. Others stay to the bitter end, but they're not always the worst candidates. So there is a relationship to overperformance. Some candidates have reasonable adjustments for dyslexia or other conditions. They get extra time. But interestingly, as far as we can tell, many of them don't actually stay any longer than the candidates without reasonable adjustments. So we're not sure what's going on there. Others do use every last second they've got. How do you manage time in an exam like this? It looks so easy. You just start at the beginning, you work through 100 questions in a straight line. But actually, if you go a bit too slowly, you've got no time left at the end. And do you need time for going back and checking and so on? So we're interested in the whole business of time management in these exams. And I think it's quite interesting because I'm not sure all the providers are very thoughtful about the ergonomics of their platforms from a candidate's point of view. It used to be easy when there were printed booklets. Candidates could see how many pages they had left and they could flip back and forwards easily and so on. As one example, if you answered a question on, say, thyrotoxicosis, and then an hour later you think, I was probably wrong on that question on thyrotoxicosis, how do you find that question? Most exams that I know of don't have a search function. You can't type THYRO, thyro, and see if it'll find any questions with that in it. So it's quite hard, and that's what the bit of paper on the desk's for, ultimately. So many of them scribble stuff down. Many of them use those flags to record things, but they don't all. Who does, who doesn't? There are facilities on one of our platforms for excluding items that are unlikely. So there's 5 items. They can click on 2 of them to say, no, they're definite non-starters. Not all platforms do it, and not all candidates do it. When do they go back to items? Do they always just go straight forward? Or do they and sometimes you see candidates who are halfway through the exam, they jump back, change the answer on something, and then carry on. as if they've suddenly realized it. And we're very aware of platforms varying in functionalities here, and I don't know of any decent survey of that. We're interested in the difference between candidates who are invigilated. Many of our candidates outside of the UK are doing these exams in invigilated exam halls still, online. So we've got all the data, but they're all together in a room. Others are doing it with remote online proctoring, and that's getting more and more common in our exams, and we worry about that for obvious reasons. We worry about candidates changing answers. If you go into the non-academic literature, you'll find many people saying you should never change an answer. Your gut instinct is always the right one to use, and you should stick with the answer you first thought of. It's wrong, actually. We know that about two-thirds of the time when they change an answer, they change it from a wrong to a right. But candidates don't know that. We're trying to work out who does and who doesn't. We're very interested in cheating, finding both unusual response patterns and also looking for unusual similarities between pairs of candidates in what they're doing. And we have some software for doing that. We have wanted to do some qualitative analyses on this. What we'd love to do is play back what they're doing and talk to them and say, why did you do this? What were you up to? And we're also interested in exam breaks. They are comfort breaks they can have, but sometimes we suspect there's more going on than comfort in the biological sense. But also we know that there's often network and software failures which pop up on our click maps. And we need to know about that in order to give candidates credit for the problems. They all show in the click maps. Okay, at the beginning, I put up that quote. I think it's from Adam. Where does Chris see assessment going now? How is assessment going to be in the future? Okay, here's some things. As I say, I tend to be provocative on these things. That's my job in a way. I'm not responsible for any of it. That does help. There is a huge scope for developing e-assessment. And I think the real scope of it should be to provide better education. It's not just to make it easier and cheaper for examining boards to run their exams. And that should help us to better understand the needs of our individual students. Because intriguingly, when I show students these click maps, they say, oh, I didn't know anybody else did it differently to me. I always go, and they describe what they're doing. So there's very little sense of what's good for individual people. I think assessment is going to get, and I'm talking about the UK here, it's going to go out of the control of individual institutions, such as the Royal Colleges and University. And the reason for that, and we've seen a number of cases in the last couple of years, these all came after COVID, by the way, when everybody went to online assessment in a hurry, and we didn't have much choice in providers. But there has been a few disasters. We're not immune to them at the College of Physicians. And we failed people who should have passed. We've passed people who should have failed. We failed to provide any results on some people who certainly deserve results. We've made them wait longer and retake the exam and so on. So there's too much scope for human error. Most of this is, it may be put down as computer error, but it's actually human error at fault, at base. And a lot of it comes because the colleges and universities have a lack of technical understanding of software and psychometrics. They think it just happens. The word I always like, I used to tell my undergraduates off for saying it, they say, well, can't we just get the computer to do it? And I always, whenever candidates ever, and my students ever use the word just in, why do people with autism have this problem? Oh, it's just a matter. And I'd go, just? Because when we say just, we usually mean there's so much that needs unpacking, we haven't unpacked it, that we really need to work out what we're thinking about. So just asking the computer to do something is not going to work. I think the General Medical Council, which runs UK medical education, but also others, will try to regulate assessment to get round these problems. But once again, there's too much scope for human error. And there's also at the GMC lack of understanding of software and psychometrics, but also of medical education itself, and indeed of medicine. Most of the people at the General Medical Council are not medics. They've got degrees in a range of fascinating things, but they're not medics and they don't understand medicine very often. I think service providers will also become more important in practical terms. The days when you could write some code for your own exam is over. You'll see where this is going. Once again, there's too much scope for human error. But the problem now, and we've had this one recently, those errors are embedded deep in code, which the customers have no access to. We knew something was going wrong and we inferred it from what the provider was doing, but the provider would neither agree nor disagree with it. They wouldn't let us into the places which mattered. And we realized with our provider, oh, I shouldn't mention them, they had little obvious interest in education or educational development of what was going on. So I think there's a real problem there with providers, and we've got to be very careful about it. I think the long-term result of this, we've got a lot of providers in the UK at the moment. They all sprung up during COVID, unsurprisingly. I think we're going to get some market contraction with those providers. There may be legislation or regulation on what they're doing. And I think that will result in stasis. People will become afraid of innovation. And I'm worried about what's actually going on in the code. It's only when you look at code, you realize where the problems have arisen. And I'd like to think that open source code would help both transparency and development. That may be optimistic, I don't know. Okay, let me finish there. I'll go back to my exam hall and those 300 students who sat there doing their final exams. Final exams, which either mean they'll be working on the wards in a few months' time, 2 months' time, or they're spending another year in the university resitting. So these are high stakes exams. And if they're on the wards, they're prescribing and doing other things. So there's risky activities here. Okay, I'll finish there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris, for a great presentation, and thank you for all your insights. Very interesting. Wondering if anybody had any questions in the comment box that they wish to ask Chris.
I think, Manny, in the UK here, we're subject to a few external factors that may influence, which will influence medical education assessment and training. So we've had the 10-year workforce plan refreshed by the government out last week, which is a lot of the what, but not the how. We're under a medical training review, which is looking at medical training in the UK, and we're anticipating that that's going to look at everything across the spectrum. So we don't quite know what that's going to be, but that could be controversial, incontroversial, a mixture of both across different factors. So we're just bracing here in the UK to see what the impact of that will be on medical training, but lots of use of AI digitization mentioned in the 10-year workforce plan. And Chris, I was reflecting on, it's really hard to train a workforce fit for the future when you're not quite sure what the future of the workforce in terms of the shop floor practice is going to look like. And like you say, technology dates so quickly. I think it's quite an interesting space to be in with how to keep up and making sure you're making the right strategic decisions on how to progress training and assessment for the future. But hopefully in the UK, the medical training review and the 10-year workforce plan will give us quite a lot of strategy and shape around that. I don't know what else is going on globally, but yes, I think all will become clear in the next few months, and no holidays for anyone for the foreseeable.
I think on that one, when we're looking at student selection and selection into postgraduate training and so on, we do look for specific knowledge and that sort of thing. But actually, what we're looking at primarily, I think, is the ability to learn. So we're looking for cognitive ability, we're looking for conscientiousness, we're looking for motivation and an interest in a professional career in medicine. And with luck, they are sufficient to mean that people can cope with whatever comes along. You know, I say I use R for all my calculations. I didn't do that 15 years ago. It came along. I realized it was wonderful. I had a lot of background experience, and so I learned to do it. And I think the same happens with clinicians and everybody else, actually. And that's what we're really selecting for. We're not selecting for who knows the answers in the boxes. What they are is indicators to us that if they can learn that, they can probably learn how to do new things. I suspect that's the ultimate story of selection. and getting a talented workforce is the key thing. By the way, Manny, you did mention something I think is rather interesting. Did I think about out loud studies? I mean, I assume you mean where people go through and talk out loud about what they're thinking about the question. We'd love to do them.
Yeah, they're very time consuming. I've done a few of them in the assessment industry, and they're fascinating. It's one of my favorite things to do, but they're so expensive.
They're always interesting. Yeah. And it's not that they take place in real time. That makes them difficult. Transcribing what they've done, interpreting what they've said, and that may be somewhere where AI or some variant on AI will give a lot of leverage. I did hear about one exam somewhere where candidates, if they were reading a question and they did something which we often hear about, they said, well, it's obvious that the correct answer is A. That's the one you want us to answer as A, but actually the correct answer is B, because if you've done any, I don't know, cardiology or something, you'd know that this is actually the correct answer. Now, there's no way candidates tell us about that, except as anecdote after the event. And I've heard about people who can stop the clock briefly on their exam. They can talk into the microphone and say, I'm sorry, but I think this question is badly worded, it's ambiguous or whatever. And they come out of that, the clock starts again. And we've got a couple of hundred of those after the exam, which our examiners can look at and say, okay, is there something we need to change? What's this telling us? So I think that there's a technological solution to that. It's in the moment and it's quick, but it actually could inform us a lot. What are the other questions? Oh, one from Adam. Oh, hang on. Lee has asked about workplace-based assessments. I don't know. Workplace-based assessments are very controversial in the UK. I think the thing that makes me most worried about them is that they're mostly gamed. And we know, for instance, that trainee doctors will ask somebody to do a workplace-based assessment for them on a topic which they choose. They choose the person whom they think is nice because other people have told them they're nice and generous and so on. And then they get a good mark. But that's got everything wrong with it in assessment terms. We talked about the idea of sending a random group of examiners into hospitals to do some workplace-based assessment, so they're not known to the candidates, they're not known, and the topic's not known. It gets a lot of pushback, unsurprisingly. So I think workplace-based assessments are very difficult, and there's not even any good data in the UK on how they correlate with other outcomes. People say, oh, it's much better at predicting who's going to be a bad doctor. Well, being a bad doctor is my main criterion for what I'm searching for in all assessment. Who are the bad ones, who are the good ones? And I'd like to see some validity on workplace-based assessments, and it's not really there. And when I talk to people, they're mainly saying, it'd be so much cheaper if we didn't have to. And once I hear that, I know that validity is not the prime mover in the whole system.
So unfortunately, we only have a minute left. So I'd like to
sorry
to close out our great conversation. Chris and his contributions and his presentation was just very informative, and we thank you for that. I want to thank Romana and Jessica and Terry and Adam for doing a great job with putting this all together. And so thank you so much. And we look forward, make sure you take the survey that's been posted in the comments section on the call to action. We'd like you to get more involved and really get to know, keep the conversation going. You know, a really good question that Catherine just asked, how do you measure a good doctor? I mean, that's what we do as psychometricians all day long. We're trying to answer that questions and manage the error, which is we manage where we are not good at measuring that. So great question. And thank you again, everybody, for attending. And we hope to be in contact with you throughout. Thank you again for this incredible first SIG meeting, and have a great rest of the week. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.